wasn't born here.
I'm gonna
I
start
came to the
again.
United States when I was in high school. So, I didn't have anyone to, show me the way, how do I get to medical school. So my pathway was not the traditional pathway. So I went to grad school and then after that I applied. So it's very similar to Dr. Wynn, like very similar. And then, I went to medical school here in the United States and residency and then fellowship. So I'm still currently in fellowship. Um, so, you guys are the younger generations, and like, nowadays it's actually medical school becomes so much more competitive compared to our time. But you know, I mean, every generation has their own challenges, and I'm glad that you guys are helping each other and coordinate things so that you can help the next person to get to medical school because it's a tough journey. It's not easy. I mentor a lot of undergrads, and I have to say my success rate is probably about like 20%. That's how I'm being honest. A big majority of the people couldn't get to medical school is because of the MCAT. Like that's just the way it is. You don't have a good score, there's nothing you can do to offset that. But there's other pathways in medicine, not just medical school. So I'm glad that you guys are doing this, but I'm here also to give you some honest opinion also. So, I'm actually very interested to see what you guys are going to talk about. So,
Thank you, Dr. Hong. Well, you gave us a surprise. I didn't know you're coming in today. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, so well, welcome you guys for coming in and attend our meeting today. I know you guys are on the break, so very glad that you guys make it here. So let's go ahead and start with our meeting today. Our guest speaker today, we have our medical student, Andy Chung. Um, Andy, would you like to give a brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Good evening. My name is Andy Chung. I am a second year medical student here at the UCLA Medical School. I grew up in Los Angeles. More specifically, I grew up in El Monte, California. And of course, it's really close to where Dr. Wynn Tran's office is, which is in Rosemead, California. So I grew up here all my life. And if you know where Rosemead High School is, it's just across the street, a few more blocks from Dr. Wynn Tran's office. So I'm local. And for my undergrad, I actually went out of state to the Midwest. So I attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison, all the way in the cold winter location. And that was a huge, huge culture shock for me. But at the end of the day, I think it taught me a lot how to be independent, taught me how to just navigate being able to research and everything else. And I am really, really excited. And I also look forward to helping and giving as much advice I can for everyone here, just because I am a first generation student. I'm the oldest in my family, and none of my immediate family members have, ever made it past high school. So navigating the pre-health or the health professions field, I know is daunting. And when I was in your shoes, it was really, really, really difficult, not even knowing how to shadow, who to ask. So I've been through it all. I've sent so many emails out when it came to shadowing. I've even went the old school route of writing letters and putting a stamp on them and making sure that they actually had a physical paper. So I think a lot of it is the tenacity and making sure that, things might not fall in place in the beginning, but figuring out if this is truly what you want to do. If that is the case, making sure that you don't give up and continue your path towards whatever you want to pursue. With that being said, at this moment in time, I'm my second year and I'm doing my rotations and clerkships. And of course, I've done two clerkships so far, which is neurology and psychiatry. And of course, there's so many other specialties that I need to look at and experience. But I've always came into this medical school field wanting to go into like a primary care field, just because of the experiences that I've had, the lack of primary care in the area, and the lack of connections to specialists. So that's something that I feel is lacking in our community. And of course that may change. A lot of people come in with one interest in mind, and all of a sudden by the fourth year they might do something different. So of course I can't really guarantee what I'm going to go into, but I think it's just a matter of who you meet, the mentors you meet along the way, and that's really important. And of course, I think when it comes to primary care and for my mission, and when I think of how I you saw my application. The bulk of my application was about just serving the underserved, serving individuals who often don't have a voice, some individuals and populations who often have really difficult times navigating the complex health system, whether it be income-based, whether it be language-based, whether it be, I don't know, like something else. But I think that aligns with really the quote that you see on the screen right here, by Cesar Chavez. And it's interesting because this quote was actually something that I saw every day when I walked to middle school. It was a mural that I saw, and it has been ingrained in me up until this day, and I feel like it's something that keeps me at bay, but it also motivates me to help our community. So if we can go to the next slide, please.
Sure. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, so what I wanted to do and cover during this talk is, of course, my experience. I think that's the bulk of it, but also the first few slides is it's just like the basics of what y'all need to do to apply for a pre-health profession. In terms of an agenda, what I want to accomplish, of course, is go through the basics of what's needed, but I want to reserve the bulk of the time towards the end for a Q&A session and a more personalized session in which you can ask me questions and maybe also open the field to Dr. Vo, because I know he has a lot of experience mentoring as well. So I think that's a great opportunity. And of course, in what I want to cover in this slide here is just the things that you need to do. No matter what you do, you have to have these experiences, these prerequisites in order to apply, in this case specifically for medical school. A lot of this information can be found on the internet, but when it comes to applying to medical school, at least, there isn't a specific major that you have to choose. I know plenty of people in my class who are sociology majors, who are psychology majors, or even English majors. And sometimes that makes you stand out because you're able to have that, you're sort of standing out from the other students. I, of course, stuck through the generic neurobiology major, so I can't speak on behalf of sociology and everything else. But when it comes to the majors, what's really important is making sure that you go to every single school's website and determining what prerequisites that they need. So the general ones are usually chemistry, biology, physics. Those are like the core ones. But you have to be really mindful that there are certain medical schools or even PA schools that want something else, whether it be a few semesters of sociology. I think gender studies is also really important as well in certain institutions. So be mindful of not only the core subjects that you have to sort of fulfill, but also each individual school's requirement. And then when it comes to clinical experiences, I think a lot of individuals see it as having to sort of like a checklist in which you sort of have to do. I think that's a wrong way of seeing things. I think what is a better way of using your experience or your time during these experiences is actually seeing if you really like it. There are so many people that I know who think that they want to go to medical school or PA school, whether it be or whatever it may be, and they would have time in the clinic and they start to realize maybe this isn't something for them. In addition, I think it's really important, especially when you're working in a clinic, to work with the patients and if it's possible, have that one-on-one time to talk about stories. I love stories, and I think that what made my decision to go to medical school more sort of firm, just because I think in the clinic setting, you have that time to connect with patients. Especially even for me, I'm going to use the example of primary care, in which you're able to see a patient, a new patient, not really know anything about them, but hopefully develop that rapport and, take care of them for the rest of their lives. And of course, I understand that this may not be the case for every single medical specialty, but if you're into taking care of patients for, a long time, I think this is something that, you should get into in terms of primary care or clinical experiences. Extracurricular activities, of course, I think we all know what that may mean. It can mean leadership, it can mean community work. It just, for um, whatever subject that you or whatever experience that you go into, just make sure that it's not, I would say, you would be able to have a project or something to write about. I think it's not enough to say, it's just be in a specific club and say, well, you were a member. I think a lot of the experiences that you do engage in, they're really helpful because when it comes to MMI or when it comes to the interview, they'll know if you actually put an effort into each club or each organization. It's really easy to weed out um, students who didn't really do much. So that's something to be really mindful about. And of course, the dreaded MCAT, which I still dread today. Dr. Vo had mentioned this too. It's a huge, huge, huge barrier. But there are many resources that I would recommend that I can also talk about. Um, so for the MCAT, I would heavily recommend something called UWorld. And I will say this, I am still having issues in terms of, how it is to properly prepare for a test. And I think a lot of it is sort of ensuring that I know the basics of it before I take certain tests. And I think sometimes that's very detrimental to your performance. I'm going to use an analogy of maybe like basketball, right? I think at the end of the game, for basketball, your end goal is to win the game, to score as many points as possible. But for me, at least, what I struggled the most about the MCAT was trying to learn too much about the rules of the MCAT. And I think that's very similar to what many students struggle with. They're focusing too much time on the science basics and reading these Kaplan books and textbooks to a point where you don't really have that time to actually do the practice problems. And, similar to basketball, you can know everything about the game and not really put in time to actually, shoot the ball. I don't think you're going to be able to win the game if you're not, dribbling the ball and actually engaging in the actual practice. So I think that's my greatest advice to, yes, it's really important to know the fundamentals and sort of brush up on your, science basics, but also ensuring that you do practice problems because these MCAT questions are very research heavy and oftentimes they mimic research articles. A lot of them are the questions and what they ask you, you sort of need to sort of filter out and determine what is the right answer. It's not very direct, and that's what makes the MCAT really, really hard. For letters of recommendation, what I recommend, I'm pretty sure, I'm not familiar with the rules have changed, but there's a service called Interfolio. Um, I would recommend Interfolio because it's a repository where you're able to have letter writers upload everything into one centralized document, so you don't have to bug a letter writer to submit your application to like so many schools. All you have to do is have a letter writer write your letter, upload it to the centralized location, and when it comes time to applying for medical school, you can go ahead and pick and choose which letters you want to be sent out. And I think that's the beauty of it. For letter writers, I would say it's really important to have at least 3 science professors, but also a doctor that you've worked with. And also some schools also want a non-science letter writer as well. So making sure, I think the end goal is getting as many letter writers as possible, uploading it into the portal, and just go from there. What I also recommend about these letters of recommendation, I think is really important, is that you're able to, in a sense, if possible, I know that certain professors are really busy. How I navigated this is sort of wrote certain parts where in which I wanted to convey, and how you phrase it to the professor or doctors. I'm like, this is what I want to do. I want to go apply to medical school. I know that your time, you're busy, but this is what I've written. Feel free to edit or add anything to it. So you sort of at the end of the day, I think that's really useful because they're able to take a look at what you want to highlight and also add to it versus you giving them a blank piece of paper and sort of hoping and crossing your fingers that they're going to be able to write something that you are comfortable with. So I think that's really good advice that I was able to pick up early on. Just sort of draft something that you feel comfortable with, sending it to them and saying, "This is what I have. Feel free to edit, take away anything you want." And then you go from there. I think that's really important. And of course, research. I would say it's of course optional, but I would say just doing a survey of my classmates, I would say a good 95% of my classmates at UCLA at least did have some type of research experience. And of course, it doesn't have to be in a lab. So that's something that I always thought that you had to do. A lot of my classmates have researched in the sociology field and the underserved, how to improve healthcare quality. I think that's really important as well. So as long as they're able to see that you do have that research experience and working with a mentor, I think is really key. And of course, there's one or two students who don't have research at all. And I think those individuals have a unique story to them. But yeah, so with that being said, in terms of admissions timeline, you're always sort of looking at the time in terms of applying for medical school. And it's really, really important that you get your application in as early as possible just because it's a rolling basis. So what I mean by that is this is a template provided by the Virginia Tech School of Medicine. So I'm going to use this as a template. But usually the AMCAS application opens in May. What that means is that you're able to upload your letters and you're able to upload your grades. And the thing is, you have to individually type in your subject fields and the letters you get. And the really important thing why you want to do this is because it takes time. A person needs to manually look at your grades and sort of verify that. And depending on how late you submit your application, that verification process can take a while. So it's really important that you're able to log in. And I would advise, for me at least, I was around like ideally you want to submit it as early as possible. And I was probably like 3 or 4 weeks. It took me 3 or 4 additional weeks to submit my entire application, but I still think that's early. So when that happens, usually by July, that's when you get your secondary applications, and your secondary applications I would say, will take a lot of time. So when you're applying for this, you have to ensure that I at least will say that it's possible to juggle having clinical work or working as an MA, whatever it may be. But I would advise to dedicate this time to just find a coffee shop or be at home, just so you're able to crank out these your secondaries, just because these secondary questions are tailored to each school. And usually when you do get a secondary, they're usually, depending on the school, 8 to 10 additional essay prompts that you need to abide by. And it gets really difficult because I specifically remember, I think it was the UC Davis Medical School, where the secondary that I received, you're only able to write probably, I say a paragraph, and that's like 4 or 5 sentences. So, of course, I think it's easier there's so much you want to write, but then the hardest part is knowing what to write in 4 to 5 sentences. And I think that's what makes it even harder. So when you submit your secondaries, they'll take a look at it along with your primary and application. If they see that you fit the school's mission and what they like, you'll be invited for your first round of interviews around August, September. And of course, this is when you're getting interviews around this area, it's a good sign that you're on the right track, and it's a good sign. But I will say that if you don't get an interview until December-ish or something, there's so many students who go on Reddit. I think Reddit, and then SDN. I think, of course, we're all gonna go on those websites. Those websites are very, very on certain days they can make you feel really good, and on certain days they can make you feel really, really crappy about yourself. So please use those resources with a grain of salt and understand that for me at least, I didn't get an interview until I believe it was January, February, and I still, got into medical school. So please have hope. So when it comes to that, anytime between December, January up until May and June, even in July, you're able to have that interview that you're able to attend and hopefully do as best as possible. And I think what's so difficult about this entire process is you're submitting your primary application. You are also, in a sense, trying to finish all the secondaries you're receiving. Certain times where I remember I had probably like 10 or 12 schools send me secondaries at the same time, like few days apart. And please be mindful that a lot of these schools have deadlines. So the deadlines are really difficult because you would want to see the schools that you really want to go into or go to, make sure you get those secondaries out as soon as possible. And also I think what makes it difficult is also trying to navigate or squeezing in when you can do mock interviews. So all of this is really difficult, but I think you have to take it from a step-by-step process. And I think that's the best way to approach it, and sort of triaging, sort of like in an emergency room of, what's most important and going from there. Because it's easy to get lost in everything, and I think triaging is really, really important. So I think this gives us a lot of time for a Q&A session. But I want to emphasize that the reason why I'm really excited to be here is just because it allows me to have that mentorship and sort of give back to students who were very similar in my shoes. I remember not knowing anything about the application process. So I'm really happy to just answer any questions or any topics that you would like me to focus on. And of course, you can also type it in the chat, and I'll also be able to answer that.
I have the questions. Oh, actually, I think Jang has the questions as well. So you can go ahead, Jang.
Thank you. Can you talk more about the foreshadowing thingy? Because
Yeah, of course.
thank you.
Yeah. So I would say a good number to shadow would be minimum 3 physicians, because at the end of the day, you're going to have a section in which in your primary application, they're going to ask for your shadowing experiences. And I think it's really important to, of course, have, if possible, shadow a wide variety of specialties. But I will say this, please shadow a primary care physician. I think, I may be biased, but of course, it's primary care physicians are the backbone of medicine, and it allows you to see a wide variety of patients, whether it be, someone in their 20s up until their 90s. And it's really important because you're able to not only understand how like an office works, but also understand um, how to work with different patients from different age groups. I will say that what I struggled the most about shadowing is I didn't know any doctors personally. What I did was just look up. I went to the USC website, UCLA website, and I just randomly found emails, and of course had a template, and I emailed them. And frankly, this is my success rate. I sent out probably like 50 emails, and only 2 doctors got back to me. And of course, your success rate may be a little bit different from mine, depending on the connections that you have. But for me, it was very daunting, especially when you're emailing people and then, you don't get a response. And it sort of makes you feel as if even early in the game, like, what am I doing wrong? Am I not good enough? But I think what's really important is you do that, but also a really good way is also asking if your PCP, if the doctor that you've seen, if it's possible to shadow. I think that's a really good start. And More specifically, what would you like to know about shouting? Would it be the process of getting experience, trying, or can you be more specific so I can best help you?
I think your answer just answered all my questions. Thank you.
Don't give up. I think that's really important. There's definitely a lot of doctors who are busy, of course, but there's also doctors who want to be mentors. And once you find that, all you need is one doctor. Once you get your foot through the door, you'll be able to get so much more experience from there.
Thank
So
you.
I'm gonna chime in a little bit and kind of explain why you sent out 50 emails and only a few of them answer to you. Not only that doctor is busy, but also it's a lot of paperwork to fill out in order for someone who is non-clinical to come into a clinical environment and see patient with you. So it's HIPAA violation. So that's why not a lot of doctors want to go through all that hoops and paperwork in order to get you guys to come into the clinic so you can shadow them. Imagine that, they do that for every single one of them, they won't have time to do that. So I would say if you want to do shadowing, the best place to start is if you're gonna do volunteer work at the big hospital, they always have a volunteer service, which means that they'll go through all the vetting first, and then you are in the system. So you can call, email any of the doctors in the hospital, and they'll be more than happy to, take you in because you already go through the process already, which means that you are allowed, to be in the system. So the system is much more easier versus, you're going to go to a new places where they don't have a lot of volunteers that work in shadows, make it a little bit difficult. And user connection, like for example, you work at Dr. Tran, he already, Dr. Wynn, he already know like how to get you guys through all that paperwork in order for you to start. So uh, I would say you go to a big hospital, volunteer there, and then asking doctors to see if they are willing to let you shadow. And I agree with you that you can shadow as much as you can, as many doctors to sort of see the experience. But don't forget, each time you shadow somebody, it's not about how many hours or how many doctors you shadow. It's about what you learn each time. So if you see a very touching story and you want to jot it down, you want to write it down because when it comes to an interview or write a personal statement, those stories will stick in your head and will help the person who interview you remember you better because there's thousands of people and they won't remember you. But if you have something to set you apart from other people, that will help you. So remember, it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. So whatever you do, just make sure you learn from it. So I have, people that go work in the lab. They say it's a research. It's not really. I teach them how to clean, glass, like just to clean the table. Not really doing any, scientific stuff. But the way that she wrote it is like I learned how to, standardize this and do all this. It's about how you write it in order to, capture your audience. Even just simply washing all the the stuff that we have in the lab. So it's really what you learn. So whatever the experience you have to know how to sell it to other people.
So does it matter how many doctor we shadow that we put on the applications?
So it doesn't matter. It's basically wherever your experience is. You want to like for right now, you don't know what you want to do, so you can talk how many doctor you shadow, but what do you learn from shadowing them? That's a more important question. Let's say if you shadow an oncology doctor and you love like how strong the oncology patient, that's more than enough. You don't have to shadow tons of doctors, but what do you like? What do you find each interaction is meaningful or not? It's like I say, it's a quality, it's not the quantity. Remember, these are not checklists. You really have to. It's checklists because you go through all that, but each time everyone goes through the same checklist. But if each person have their own story to go with it, it makes it a little bit different from the others who might have the same experience, might have the same number of showering hours. It's how you sell yourself. What do you learn from it?
I would definitely agree with that. It's more of when it's an impactful experience when we're shadowing and making sure that you write that down. Of course, it may be a busy day in clinic, but the thing is, the first thing you want to do is when you go home, jot it down. What did you feel in the moment? for me, at least in my personal statement, I remember specifically and very vividly, it's way different to sort of read about cancer, but also it's also very different to see it in an underserved community where they feel lost, not knowing where to go, how they're going to get connected to patients, and being able to just hold their hand and sort of seeing what they're going through is really important. So making sure how you felt during that experience and being able to articulate that. And of course, Dr. Vogt said, how do you sell yourself? Just because you shadowed 50 doctors, the admissions board is not going to say, wow, this student shadowed 50 doctors. I think they're in good shape. No, you can shadow 50 doctors and not have an impactful experience or not know how to sell yourself. And of course, I think that's going to make you a very less successful applicant versus actually taking the time to see how you can make an impact and how you're able to sort of explain what you've learned through those clinical experiences.
Well, thank you for both of Annie Chung and Dr. Vo for a very good input into shadowing. And sometimes I shadow like a doctor, and then if I want to like have more shadowing experience, I just ask that doctor, like, do you know anyone who's willing to take a student to shadow them or something like that? And then they'll give you like, oh, this doctor is able to get you in or something. Yeah, and that definitely helped me to get more shadowing experience in terms of like a student, undergrad student. We do have one question in the chat from Doug. He's asking, when is a good time to start studying for the MCAT?
I would say at the very minimum, and I'm really even hesitant to say this, 6 months out. So I think May is when the AMCAS application opens, right? I feel more comfortable. This is my advice, and please, like, everybody's different. I would say for me, 6 months is the minimum, but I think you should definitely spend more time with that because it's the first few months you're trying to figure out what resources to use and it's a learning curve. I would feel more comfortable saying at least give it, like 8 months to a year prior to May.
Okay, I'm gonna chime in here and let you know in a secret. I think Andy Chung, you MS2, so you probably haven't gone through the step 2 and step 3 yet. So it's all medicine, they test the same thing. So it's basically they have a concept they want you to understand, and they will take that concept and they put it in different questions. So the way that I learned, I didn't do well on step 1 because I didn't know how to study for it. But once you figure it out for step 2, step 3, every step is the same. So it's not about what resource you use. It's about how many questions do you do, because some people study very differently. Some people just kind of like remember, like memorization. It's not going to get you far. You really have to understand like the concept they're trying to test you. And the only way that you can, understand better is by doing questions. So the more questions that you do, the better you will do better. Trust me. So this book, take some resource that you have and do all the questions. And when you do the question, learn from it, learn from the mistake. Because if you do the question and you got it wrong, don't be discouraged. Learn from that, and then the next time that you get the same question, make sure you get it right, because that means that you understand it. And then you keep doing it, and then you keep doing it. So the question is, when do you start studying? Study as soon as possible, because the more questions that you do, the better you will get. The problem with Andy Chung is that he's in medical school. He don't have time to do that. So that's why they have to be very specific about when you study. But in general, people that do well in medical school, because they do more question banks. I have people do UR twice and 3 times, but then every time they see the same question, they get it wrong. It doesn't help. But the more that you repeat, the more that you understand how the test people that write the question ask you the question, you kind of guess like, oh, what they're trying to ask me, and you understand that, and then you understand. So nowadays, like when I study for an exam, I just do question banks. I don't even like study anymore. Like I will read about the concept, and I try to make sure that I can understand it, and then I just do the question over and over and over and over again. So start as soon as possible, whatever you want. again, studying for these exams is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So you can't just do like 2 3 months and then you think that you're gonna improve because it's gonna take longer than that. You really need to have a concrete plan. Like everyone is busy. So you have to make sure that every day you study a little bit. Make sure you have a schedule that you're gonna cover these things and do questions. Obviously, you don't want to burn yourself out studying, so you still have to enjoy life. This is not like if you can't make it to medical school and your life is over. It's not like that. It's the same thing. Once you're in medical school, we have residency, we have fellowship. It's like you have to know how to study because you will not be stopping studying once you get into medical school. It's actually more studying. It's now like how do you study effectively and still have time to enjoy, your family or your friends. You can't really get rid of the social aspect of your life.
So I have one question. So how many percentage of the time that we should spend on reviewing the concept, and how many percentage of the time we should spend practicing the questions, answering the questions?
That's individual. Some people read the concept once and they understand it. Some people need 3 4 times. The problem is, each person will study differently. So what works for Andy might not work for me. What works for me might not work for the next person. But everyone has the same sort of backbone, right? They do UWord, they do the UFAP. Like that's the kind of like everyone have the same way, but not everyone have the same result just because everyone have a little bit of different how they study. But in general, the more that you understand the concept, the better it is for you. Like that's what I learned now. Like, when I see something, I try to go deep down to see like why is that the answer? Why the other one is not the answer? That's the better way to do it. So each question is not about the right answer, it's about why the other choices are wrong. So because they can tweak a little bit and then make the question completely different. So you have to understand like why is that a wrong answer? So there's no right and wrong of what you do. Just figure out a way that's going to work for you. It takes time, but everyone will figure out in the end.
Thank you. So there's another question in the chat. When do we need to start choosing your specialty in the medical school?
I'll let Dr.
Andy
Vil.
can answer that.
I can
Andy, you can
answer.
answer
that. At the end of the day, I've have classmates or upperclassmen who've decided, during their third or fourth year. You don't have to come in knowing what you want to do, but I will say this, having sort of a notion of what you want to do sort of allows you to, even when we're talking about shadowing doesn't stop once you get into medical school. That's the thing that I sort of blew my mind because it's more of, again, none of these items are checklists. It's more of once you're in this field, you're committed to a life learning process. Even when you're attending one, even you're a resident, you're always learning something. So it's really important to explore. And as your first year, sort of shadow as much as possible. So you sort of have a gauge of what you want to do. Because then again, after when you're done with medical school around your later stages of third and fourth year, there's residency. It's this whole process, very similar process of sort of a quote unquote applying to medical school again, because you're sort of having to showcase why you want to go into a specific field. So if I were to example, you want to get into cardiology, right? Um, Maybe it's a good idea for me to work on a project during my second or third year, to emphasize that I'm interested in that. But of course, you don't have to have a committed a specialty in your first year or so. A lot of it is just determining what you want to do and go from there.
I think you mentioned about a project that we should do during medical school in order to get into some kind of specialty. Do you know what type of project that they do?
It's dependent on what you want to do. So there's definitely competitive specialties, and there's definitely ones that are not so much. And I use cardiology and I use maybe even ophthalmology. Let's use an ophthalmology as an example. Very highly competitive field. So what I mean by that, if you want to go to ophthalmology, from what I see, a lot of the candidates that I've seen when they're current, if you can easily pull up, what I recommend here is what you want to do. If you want to go to a specific field, go into the resident or fellows website, because every single institution will have a list of individuals and sort of look at what they did during their undergrad and what kind of publications that they had. Most of these competitive specialties need research and publications. In the field of ophthalmology, it's usually like a minimum like 5 or 6 publications in the realm of ophthalmology. Does that make sense?
Yes, got it. There's another question in the chat that asks, as a freshman in college, what should I be focusing on now?
Enjoy your undergrad years. I think I think that's really, really, really important. I think yes, it's important to sort of have a pathway of where and have goals in place, but again, enjoy being 18, 19, 20, whether, whatever it may be, enjoy life, develop friends, because that's really important. I think it doesn't make any sense for you to just solely focus on academics and not have that relationship with your friends. Develop good habits, develop being able to have good coping mechanisms, mental health, seeking out resources. I think that's really important. That's going to continue even onto medical school and residency because times will get tough, but making sure that you develop those strong social support groups is really important. But if you really wanted to know like what you should really focus on in terms of, if you want to go into medical school, I'd say your first year, just make sure you do well on your courses. Don't worry too much. If you're a freshman in college, don't worry too much of what you need to do to go to medical school. Just make sure the classes that you're taking, making sure you're putting your best foot forward, and take it from there. Don't put too much pressure yourself as you're during your first year of undergrad.
Right. Does anyone want to kick in with the last questions? Because we are going to try and wrap up. We also have a group photo after this, so please stay. And make sure you guys feel free to put in your chat or raise your hand, but make sure you guys sign in to the meeting today.
I think Trin, she just raised her hand, so you can just feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay, so I have a so what would you say is like the most important factor in determining if you could make it into med school? Like is like your MCAT scores like the most important stuff, or like the personal statement or something like that?
I don't think there's a single variable from my perspective. I know people who've gotten like 520, which is in the above 90%, like up there and not get into medical school. And maybe that's because they're not an all-around applicant. Maybe their personal statement wasn't um, up to par, or even during the interview process. There's definitely students who really look good on paper, and when it comes to the interview process, not be the person that they seem on paper. So I can't pin I def MCAT is really important because there's so many applicants out there. A lot of times metrics, you put your applications in, there's a computer algorithm that will either take your application for consideration for an interview or just automatically kick you out. So of course, metrics really matter, but making sure that you're able to, again, Dr. Ravel said, take advantage of the experiences that you have, whether it be volunteering, working with patients, and being able to articulate that and selling yourself. If you're not able to sell yourself, you're not going to be a successful applicant.
Okay, so I'm gonna be honest with you. Okay, it's like he say, a lot of school will say that they will use this holistic approach. They're gonna look you as a whole application. But again, every school there's thousands of applicants. How do they filter out those applicants? They're gonna use the GPA and MCAT score. Okay, there's no question there basically. So you really need to do well on the MCAT and the GPA in order to set yourself apart. And depends on what you get on your MCAT, then you have to decide whether you're going to go to an MD school or a DO school. So those are the questions first. You really need to get a good score on the MCAT first, and then you can start asking yourself like, what are my safety school? What are my wanted schools? So those are the first questions. And the second thing is, obviously everyone want to do well on the MCAT. So you really need to spend a lot of time on that front. But the second thing is you have to understand that medical school now, there's so many people who actually take years off in order to study for the MCAT score. So this MCAT score keeps going higher and higher. So you cannot use a medical score in order to get a good and get into good schools. You have to understand every year the MCAT score will go up because you have better resources, you better test taker skills. So it will go up. So you got to do well on that. The other thing that you as applicants, all of you guys gonna have an advantage compared to other people is that you came from a different background. You came from a Vietnamese, community. You came from someone a different culture. So you really have to learn how to sell that. Myself, I consider myself underrepresented in medicine. Okay, a lot of people will say African American, but you have to understand. You have to sell that to yourself that you are actually underrepresented in medicine also. Like in Massachusetts, being Vietnamese is underrepresented. That means that every year, some of the school, state school, they are required to, accept one or two Vietnamese students. And, so that's your advantage. You have to place it to your advantage. So, it's not taking advantage. It means that we understand and, what's the need, right? So the Vietnamese patient will feel more comfortable talking to a Vietnamese doctor. So being Vietnamese, you fit the criteria. So you have to understand that. So always think of yourself as special so that way it will help you set apart. But like I say, you have something that set you apart from other people, but your grades have to be good. I mean, I cannot stress that more than I have, students who have great research. They have like, a great GPA, but MCAT score is so low. Like I cannot they apply to so broad, but they also want to reach like a really high, like a prestigious school. You're not going to get there with that. You have to understand with your MCAT score, you have to go to a certain safety school. Like that's, you have to be strategic about it because the cost involved whenever you apply to medical school, it can, cost like thousands of dollars. It's not cheap. So you have to be very specific about that. And, it's money. You guys don't make money yet. So thousands of dollars is very expensive. So I'm glad that you guys are talking about it now. So keep asking questions. And, the process of applying to medical school is not easy. So it's good to ask questions. There's always a little bit nuances. For example, I have, student asking me, how do you ask a person to write you a good recommendation letters? Because let's be frank, there's some people that write good, they write good letters. Some are not because they're not used to it. So you have to learn how to, get a good letters. Not everyone's gonna write you a very good letter. So you have to learn how to ask a certain way. You have to give them supplement information so that they can give you a good letter. Okay, that can make a break. Personal statement don't make or break your application, but it can set you apart. If you write a really good personal statement, people will remember it and they will ask you during your interview. So like it doesn't really make your application become negative, but it could be a plus. So you should work on it. So
I'm a big advocate for the personal statement. I remember during very many of my interviews, they had wanted me to just talk more about the personal statement. So of course, it can be a very big highlight to your application. And as Dr. Vo said, if you don't have a certain score for the MCATs, or like if you don't have X amount of dollars, you're not going to be able to go to Disneyland. You can only go to Knott's Berry Farm. That's the unfortunate truth.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hong and Andy, for coming and agree to share your experience. We definitely feel very privileged to have you guys here and let us know about your experience about med school and what to do for the future. So now,
Yeah, I shared my email for the group in case you would like me to just take a look when it comes for me to review your application or your personal statement. So please just use me as a resource. I'm trying to, give back to as many people as possible. So of course, I'm grateful to be here.
Dr. Hong, can we have yours too?
I was gonna write for you guys, but again, I would strongly suggest you guys to take advantage of Andy because again, he's willing and right now he's at a prime time, so he has time to talk to you guys. I mean, I have a baby and everything, so it's a little bit harder for me, but take advantage of Andy. Like is in California and he knows the in and out, so use them. Don't be afraid. You know the thing that I learned going through medical school and residency, the problem with us Asian is that we are so timid. I've seen residents who come and rotate with us the entire month, but nobody remembers that person. You know why? Because we never actually open up. We never actually make any good impression to the person that we work with. So like I'm generally a very timid person when I first came to the United States, but now I'm different. You know, like even though I'm timid, I still want to let people know who I am, right? So whatever you're good at, I mean, I'm good at taking pictures. So I tend to like, take pictures of people and I let them know and they remember who you are. So like don't think that, they don't remember you, but you gotta make that effort to let people know who you are. Don't be that person. Go through the entire rotation and nobody could recall that who's that guy? Like they don't remember your name. That's really bad. So make sure you make a good impression. You don't have to be obnoxious. Just be nice to be who you are, but let people know who you are, right? Let them know a little bit about, like what is your personal life? What do you do outside of medicine? People are interested in that generally. So I'll be a little bit more open. We are too reserved to be honest with you.
That's a
That's
really
just the
great
way.
advice because, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, that's because the way that we raised, right? We Vietnamese, our parents raised us like that. We don't have a voice. So that's why now I'm very glad that Andy is, doing this because you know what, in the future, he's going to be in his community, helping this community. So that's why Dr. Wynn, he makes a big impact because he's, vocal, he's helping other people, he's helping the community. We as a community, we don't like to help each other. That's the problem. Look at the Indian community, look at the Chinese community. They're a big community. Everyone know each other, not us. So that's why we have to change that. So I'm glad and they start thinking that way. Have to be a little bit more vocal than So make a good impression, guys. Don't be too timid.
All right, so let's go ahead and go to our group. Oh, let me stop recording first.